Are you an ambitious, driven entrepreneur starting to feel overwhelmed, maybe a little trapped by your business? Well, I have a solution for you. It is the 5-day Bottleneck to Breakthrough Challenge, where in an hour a day, we will give you the roadmap, the blueprint, the treasure map to where you can find yourself with more free time, more freedom of money, and a more valuable business. Hope to see you soon. www.bottlenecktobreakthrough.com. Hello and welcome to The Real Bottom Line. Today on this episode, we're going to do a replay of an interview and a talk I had with Michael DeVenney a year or so ago. And why this is so important is it plays into a lot of the conversations we've been having recently about breaking out of business prison. So Michael DeVenney's interview was one of our most popular episodes, and we talk a lot about entrepreneurs and mental health. And I think that relates back to our business prisons we're building for ourselves in a big way because it can affect our mental health. And we just don't talk about it enough. It can lead to really, less than positive feelings about our business, lead to decisions because we're tired and overwhelmed that may not best serve us in the long run, but it's a short-term decision. So it's also why I created a challenge for entrepreneurs so that they can start to change how they run their business. And that information on that challenge is in the show notes. So please enjoy this replay with Michael and start thinking about how you as a business owner are feeling about your mental health and if there's any steps you need to take.
Appreciate it, Wendy.
I'm so glad to have you here today. I'm really excited about where we're going to go today with the conversation, but I thought we could start a little bit with your business journey, if you don't mind. Once upon a time, you were a financial planner like me, and then you took a different road. And more into, I guess, the leadership training and development side of things. Have I characterized that correctly?
Yeah, strategy development and organizational design. Yes. Yeah.
What caused that shift for you?
Compliance. I don't work well within really tight frameworks and rules. And the investment business, I was an analyst as well. So I do like numbers. I just didn't like being forced into how to do things, compartments, and I still don't like that. So, and there's always the entrepreneur side that even though you're given a fair bit of, as my former business partner would say, he valued flexibility, I valued independence. So at some point that was gonna blow up. So I left and went into the consulting side, and I've always been fascinated by why people do what they do, how they work together, what you can do to help kind of bring people to work towards something.
Yeah.
So going into the leadership side was quite interesting, and I love strategy. That's one of my favorite areas. So towards the end of the consulting time, I was doing what a lot of people called strategy triage, which is I worked with a number of private equity firms, and I'd be dropped into companies that were struggling or having some challenges, and just trying to unwind it and figure things out. And I love a complex problem. So that was really something I enjoyed greatly.
What did you see was there a common element when you're doing these strategy triages that you could say, don't do this?
Lack of focus. So these companies would primarily be entrepreneurial companies. And for most business owners, there's probably never an opportunity that doesn't look good. So you just keep taking them on, and they just get overcommitted, overwhelmed. I think a lot of it always came down to one thing, which was communication and the lack of it. So leaders would have a clear vision for where they wanted to go, but they hadn't really communicated that to others. And during the time that I was doing most of my consulting, the idea of actually including people in the actual development of strategy was totally foreign. So, senior teams would hide away for 6 months building the strategy, and then suddenly spring it on everybody and expect a lot of applause and interest. And most people would just go, what? and then go back to what they were already doing. So a lot of it was just trying to, how do you, one, how do you involve people? And two, how do you communicate effectively to keep everyone on side? And then how do you engage them to move it forward? So
Interesting. I think you use the Colby tool a lot in your practice. Excellent. Yeah, we're big fans of the Colby as well.
Yeah, sorry, excuse me. What I like about it is that it stays with you. It describes you over your lifetime. I remain the same in the sense of how I approach work. I may change a lot over the years based on how I interact with other people, what my personality is like. But the way I do things, that stays the same.
Oh, that's fascinating, isn't it? And it does affect how teams work together if they don't understand that.
You have a team of quick starts, which at one point I did. It just meant there was just so much going on and no one really clear about how to get anything done. So we never lacked for ideas, but we were definitely challenged with execution. And that would be the typical, we've got 15 projects and they're all good, so we really can't not do them. And most of them had not been researched. They were really mainly conceptual. And I was told once that I was complaining to the team at the time why we're not making more progress. Why are we not getting traction? And someone did have the courage and honesty to say that if you would simply stick with one thing at a time, we would get somewhere. And so right back at you. And that did hit home because I'm easily distracted. I love a number of things going on at once. And I'm someone who can switch quite quickly between different tasks. Sit for a full day and work on a project, incredibly painful. If I don't have Tina Turner playing, I can't do it.
Tina Turner is your muse, is she?
I actually met her. I've always loved her music, and finally, even recently, with therapy, I was having a real struggle the last number of months with focus again, and sitting down and working on projects. And my therapist said, have you really tried music? You used to use music all the time, so Tina Turner once again, and nothing's better. I can do 2 and 3 hours at a time, and I don't know. It just and it's not just Tina. It'd be just having music on. I find really helps me. Oddly enough, helps me focus on what I'm doing, not get distracted by everything that's going on around me and what I could be doing, should be doing, might be doing, and that type of thing.
I have a theory that it takes that certain things keep the squirrel and blingy thing people in your head occupied while you get the extra work done.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a balance of you're trying to distract one part of you while keeping the other part focused.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of cycling and hiking, and that's where I let the other part go. Because you're outside, and it's more likely to be positive outside. It's rare that I would ever, every day I'm out, rain, sun, whatever. I just like being outside. And I'm really lucky in where I live that I can just go out the door, and I've got hiking trails. I've got either road or mountain or trails to bike on. And it's just getting out and letting the day go. And it doesn't mean the day was bad. It means the day, yesterday was a really, really positive day, but I desperately needed to get out. At 5, I got out at 5:20. It did not time the light very well, so I was coming back in the dark, and I just kept reminding myself, okay, you've got to get lights. You've got to get lights, because I will be a hood ornament before too many more days.
Yes, that would not be good. Tell me about, it feels like you've started a couple of other ventures now, Work Insights and the Mindset Project. What was the Mindset Project about?
So the Mindset Project, to a great extent, started to help me understand what happened to me.
Okay.
I had depression and anxiety issues for years, but mental health was something that was really not talked about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And I think to a great extent, we probably didn't really, most of us didn't understand what it was. So what I tried to do is just work longer hours and work harder. We opened up another business. So when I started the consulting company, it was almost an answer to, I was feeling so much stress and pressure. I needed something to go to. So I added more hours to what I was already doing. And there's only so many years you can do that before it really starts taking effect. And I think someone said I'm a really high functioning depressive. So, or I'm also depressingly optimistic. But it just hit a point where I could not handle it. And coming in the office every day, like it's funny, when I came in the office, there's a hallway. And when they'd open the door, it just felt like this rush of water that I have $1 million of overhead that has to be covered. And before I make anything, I have to cover that $1 million. And everyone here is depending on me to be able to make that happen. And it just started getting so overwhelming that I just couldn't handle it. And I started to go into a really, it would have been the deepest depression I went into, to the point that I simply could not work any longer. And one of the saddest parts of all that was we closed one of the businesses, which was a consulting business. And that meant people lost jobs. And although everyone there, they all knew, everyone had been a part of it. I had been very open about what was going on. Everyone moved on, and probably have done better without me. But the parting was tough. I took 2 months, and I was really struggling with, was it me? Is there something damaged with me? Like I'm weak. Like a friend of mine worked at Emera, and she's up at 5 a.m. going for a run, baking muffins. And she was in, and she's like this senior high-powered executive who was doing all these things, and thinking what is wrong with me? And the mindset project was to find out, was it just me, or is this something a lot of other people go through? And I went into the mindset project to really understand entrepreneurs and mental health and how it affects their decision making. And when I look back, I would say that I did not know what I was doing. And but I've been a researcher and an analyst for years, so it wasn't that bad. But the biggest, I think, accomplishment is we had 437 entrepreneurs take an hour out of their time to complete a survey. And what came through that loud and clear was I was not alone. And this was something that was prevalent and that people were not dealing with. So the big number, of course, was that 67% of all entrepreneurs will have some form of mental illness during their working years. So 2/3 of us will experience this, and more than a third will not deal with it. And
what does that mean, not deal with it?
They won't seek treatment. They won't talk about it. A lot of what I heard was, no one will understand. The life that I have, no one's going to get it. And going to a therapist, going on medication, whatever it's going to be, not going to change things. So there's just so many people that continue just to put pressure on themselves. And originally, it's still the largest study ever done in the world on entrepreneurs and mental health. So I'm quite proud of it. It took us down a road that I wasn't quite that. It was the first time in my life I wasn't kind of driven towards a goal.
Interesting.
I wanted, I've always been, if someone had described me in the past, it would be driven. And I heard a little bit cold, which was kind of hard to hear. But so I was quite focused, driven, wanted to perform, wanted to do the best I could. It was really hard on the people around me because I know the first time the team were so happy we hit, $100 million in assets. And instead of celebrating, my comment to everybody was, well, it's not going to matter until we hit 200. And so that quickly deflated everybody around me. And my focus was never on what I'd actually achieved. It was always on what had to be done. And there was always more for me that had to be done. So when the depression really took me out, and it's an odd comment, but I would look back and say it was the single best thing that ever happened to me, because it really opened up me to being able to be who I am, not who I thought I had to be. And the mindset project morphed into, well, where do I go with this? And I originally thought that if we could reduce stress, that would change the way entrepreneurs work. If you don't have stress, you don't have a meaningful life. Stress is a natural part of life, and it's more about how we respond to it than whether we have it or not. We hope we have stress in life. Otherwise, we're not doing anything with it. So that was a struggle for me. Okay, it's not the stress. And so it really came down to the working environment. Like, how do we have a healthy way of working that would enable us to respond more effectively to stress and be positive to the people around us? So I did not think when I was 56 years old, I'd have a startup, and one that was based on technology. It's just not my background, but that's what happened. So developed an analytic that would be able to assess the work environment, help people, particularly leaders, understand the stress that's in the environment. Do people feel psychologically safe? What's the experience that they're having? And what can you do with that? So it took us about 2.5 years to develop the first analytic. And then we launched it at a just impeccable time, which is February of 2020, which, of course, the lockdown happened a month later. So that was a good test of what I'd learned. And I'm happy to say that, it continued developing. We now have a series of analytics. We've gone way deeper into what we can do. We're using AI to be able to understand the tone and sentiment that's behind the numbers. So I've always been really attracted to understanding the context. So when you see a number, if you take it back to the investment industry, if a company's making, has gone up by 20%, why is that? There's so many things that could be the cause of it, and it's understand the context. Is it something that is supportable, sustainable, or is it just something else going on that's creating an artificial event? So now we're at the point that's what our focus is, really helping leaders understand how best to support people in the culture they have and make it a healthy one.
Interesting. What are some of the key metrics that would to determine whether a culture was healthy or not?
So the main one is always the foundation piece, which is psychological safety.
Okay.
And that's, easily explained. I guess the most easy explanation is, do you feel that you can say what you think without any retribution? So do you feel you can be yourself? And there's really just 10 questions that we have to ask around that. But that's the foundation, that if there is not psychological safety in the environment, people don't feel that they can talk. They don't feel that they can provide ideas. They don't feel that they can be themselves. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of stress that comes out of that. So that's always where we start. And then we build it from there with, what's the working experience like? Do people understand? One of the big things we do, which of course is still my strategy piece coming through, is that, do people understand the direction of the business? Do they understand, and do they actually commit to it? And then we look at what the culture's like, and finally, how do people work together? And the big thing we work on now is, how ready are people for change? And we can measure how ready people are, why they are or why they're not, and then what can you actually do about it? So one thing that right now I'm very lucky with is, one part of a healthy life is having meaningful work. And I am dripping in meaningful work. It just is everywhere. There's nothing I'm doing right now that doesn't leave me feeling I'm making a difference. I'm still, I have PTSD, so I'm still living with that every day and going through things. And it can be a struggle at times, I think, for a lot of people, in which I go through a lot, is that I'm doing all the right things. Why do I still slide into depression? Why do I still have really hyper anxiety? And, that is a part of the illness I have. It's chronic. I'll have it for my lifetime. And my focus is trying to find a way, as they say, I want to enjoy my life, not just survive it.
When did you decide to be so candid, open, and vulnerable about your health?
Um,
And why?
Why? Yeah, so I've asked myself that too. I think a lot of, in one way, it's also healing for me to actually, I like to write. So when I write out how I feel, it becomes more real for me. And I've always been a talker. That's never been a problem for me. And when I found out how many people do not share or talk to other people about what they're feeling, and I came from a family that never talked about feelings. In fact, we were actually trained not to express them. So when I went through the depression, the big depression as I call it, I really felt I had to talk. And luckily I had a lot of connections that could help put that message out there. And the first one was Mark Lever at Saltwire, who said, Mike, whatever you want to write, we'll publish. So we did a series of 3 full-page articles. And what stunned me was I had over 600 private emails that came from those articles from people who were experiencing it and wondering what they could do, from others who were around people who had anxiety and depression and other types of mental illness, and how could they help. And that really pushed me down the road of starting to write about it. And I'm very open. So I was also abused as a child. And what I found is that, so I read constantly. So of course, when I'm reading, I find out that 20% of men have been abused in some way in their childhood. Less than 2% would talk about it. So I thought, I'm talking. So I don't care anymore. I've spent 30 years of my life trying to meet what I felt other people wanted from me or expected of me. And that left me miserable and depressed. So I thought, at this point in my life, I am going to just talk. I'm going to say what I think, and not in a obnoxious way, but I want to put the message out there and I felt I was alone most of the time. And I really wanted people to know that they were not alone, that other people are experiencing this, other people are facing problems. It's not to trivialize what any one person is feeling, because it's all relative. You may be really stressed about something, and I could go, I don't get that, Wendy. Like there's such a simple way out of that. But to you, that's incredibly important. The same way for me, like you go, Mike, really, like you've got bigger things to worry about. But for all of us, it's relative. And it's a combination of just, and right now there's still so much stigma around mental health. It's an illness that's based on humans being human, and it's natural. And yet, if I have diabetes, I could talk openly to anybody about it, and no one will think differently about me. When I talk about having PTSD, when I talk about having anxiety to the extent that I'm hypervigilant, that I have depression issues, the statistics show that 49% of people would prefer not to work with me, which is stunning. So we have a huge stigma. As I said, I used to think stress was the issue. Without a doubt, the challenge we face right now is that stigma is the issue. That this is one illness that there's a tremendous amount of stigma around. And I don't think we can make the progress we need to until we move that. And it is the one thing that we can change. Mental health is something every one of us share, whether it's ourselves personally or whether it's people close to us. Someone in our life is experiencing some form of challenge to their mental health, even to the point of a mental illness. So it's something to me that should be the great connector, something we can all share. But yet I find it's the great divide, that as soon as I talk to somebody about it, it's like they'll pull back. And I've had letters from lawyers, from accountants, and executives saying that if I talk about being depressed, I'm going to be taken off the career channel. I'll be removed from cases that basically support the financial lifestyle of my family. So there's still a huge stigma to actually talking about the illness that you have, and it's rooted in biology, so it's real, and a lot of it's invisible. That's the problem that most people have with it. But to be honest, diabetes is invisible to a great extent, but yet, we really quickly, not to pick on diabetes. My father was diabetic, but I mean, that to me is the biggest challenge, is that if we can just have comfortable, natural conversations, I am still who I am. Like, I can still perform, I can still be creative, I can still achieve things and make things happen. I just happen to have a mental illness.
How you mentioned that we are because it's silent, we all probably know people who are having some mental health issues. How do we support people in those? Like, from your experience, what's the best approach or idea or strategy to come out to offer support?
So 2 answers. One is the quick one. So the one not to do is to try to fix us. Nothing is worse than someone, I know just what you need to do. No, you don't. And you immediately discount me. You discount what's happening to me, what's going on. But it's not meant to be negative. It just comes through incredibly negative, and it will close people up. But the one thing that I find, and I can only talk from my experience because I'm not a health professional, what I really encourage people to do when they say, like, what can I do to help somebody? Be there, talk, go for a walk with them, get them outside, chat, ask questions, and don't jump to any, like, oh, I know what you should do, or here's what you could look at. Just ask questions and listen. That to me is the biggest thing, because whether we're surrounded by people or not, when you're particularly in depression, but also with anxiety and other forms, you do feel alone. A lot of times the natural thing to do, which is also one of the worst things to do, is you isolate. I need to get away from people. And that just gives it the ability to grow and take over. And I'm not someone who naturally reaches out, but I have some really great friends who reach in, and they're the ones who will, I had one friend, Jeff, who, I was supposed to go to a clinic, which I was dreading because I just didn't want to be that person. And Jeff started as my cycling coach and ended up as one of my closest friends. And he said, if you commit to me, I'll commit to you. And he put in 5 days a week that he would either go for a hike or a bike with me every day, and we just talked. And what's great about Jeff is that we can be out for 3 hours and talk the entire time and solve all the world's problems. And then when we get back, I have no idea what we talked about, but it was great. And it's things like that. And you don't have to commit 3 hours, but even sitting down for 15 minutes and just hearing the person. That's the big thing, is we just want to be heard, and not with judgment, not with, what can we do, but just to be heard. And the other piece I'll put in really quickly is go to a therapist. I've heard so many stories of people who question whether they should go to a therapist, and other people saying, well, you don't have a problem yet, there's no need to go. You don't go to a therapist because you have a problem. You go to a therapist because you want to understand what is going on with you. And you want someone who is unbiased, who can step back and provide you with that, that partnership or guidance, however you can word it. And I'm lucky that I've got this incredible therapist who, without him, I don't know where I'd be. I see him twice a week. I've seen him for coming on 7 years now. And he still seems fascinated by everything I say, like after that period of time. So, but he's got me through a lot of challenges. So,
if you were to offer business owners, entrepreneurs, 2 pieces of advice around mental health and illness, what would you offer them up?
The biggest challenge that entrepreneurs and business owners face is that we live our life in the gap. So, as I'd mentioned, we measure ourselves to where we think we should be, not to where we've come from. And oddly enough, my therapist got me to do this a few weeks ago, that I was down about here I am sliding back into a depression. I do everything. I hear this a lot from people. I do all the right things. I meditate, I journal, I exercise, I do all these things. It's not working. And he said, like, go back 7 years and think about how you've changed. Think about what you've accomplished over those 7 years, and then we'll talk about it. And I just have to read this book that talked once again about the gap concept, is that when you spend your life thinking about where you need to go, you'll never get there. But if you simply turn that around and look at what have you achieved from when you started, you're suddenly feeling totally different. I wrote 14 things down that I've achieved since I started therapy. And I suddenly went, I'll say crap. Holy crap, I have come a long ways. And it did really make me feel better. But for entrepreneurs, I think there's a natural need to achieve. There is a statistic that 49% of entrepreneurs come from family homes where there be at least one person close to them who has had a mental illness. Mm-hmm. So there is a prevalence that we can go down that road. And we put so much pressure on ourselves to perform, to achieve. And if you look at all the words that describe entrepreneurs, I won't say anything, but there's a startup organization that was promoting one of their new contests called the Dragon's Den Effect. But anyway, the pressure you're putting on people that you have to win these contests, you have to scale and grow as fast as possible. It's not about building a good business. It's about how do I put on the appearances that I'm really, I'm going to be a unicorn. I don't want a horn stuck in the middle of my forehead. So I'm not really focused on that. Like, I'd really like to build a good business that'll make a difference.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest piece of advice I can give, is that to step back from the expectations of others and look at where you've come from and stay really, really focused on what it is that you would like to do with your business. That's probably the biggest advice. And the other one is to cut the hours back a bit. Make some time for yourself. And I've had a good chat with a few people lately, like someone said they just couldn't find time to take, some space for themselves. I said, so if you were just diagnosed with cancer, would you be able to take a day, a week off to be able to deal with that? Of course. Isn't your mind as important? So they did, actually, which was really nice to see. So I do think that entrepreneurs take on too much. We'll say yes to anything for timelines that are just ridiculous. And most clients are more than happy to get the work a week later. You're the one that said you'll do it the week earlier, just because you want to please so much. And you would just end up putting so much pressure on yourself. So I think the two things is, if you can measure yourself from where you've come from and keep that in view, and then keep building on it. And if you can really set some reasonable timelines and expectations. The biggest thing we find right now in the data that we're working with is that stress levels have gone up, and that's not a big surprise. But what's coming through is the number one stress has changed dramatically over the pandemic. So when we first started the pandemic, physical health was the main stress issue, which is natural. That turned to mental health. And now what's coming through is managing expectations. So people are really struggling with what is reasonable at this point. This has gone on for way longer than we thought. It's still going on. What is expected of me? What do I need to do right now? So I think those are the two big things. And sorry, I give really long answers.
They're great answers. Talk away. I'd like to open up the floor now to some questions. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask? Just unmute yourself and let me know. Andre?
Thanks, Michael. That's fantastic. A lot of courage on your part to start talking about it, because it is definitely a stigmatism. But with my experience with sharing my journey and my life tempest, as I call it, five years ago, I'm starting to see that there's maybe a little bit of jealousy that people are giving me the hardest time about opening up, because it almost seems a little bit of a jealousy of being able to take ownership and the courage to get help. Because it does take a lot of courage. And like you said, therapy is not about figuring stuff out. Well, it is, but it's more about, therapy is all about self-discovery. right? And that was my experience. And I appreciate you sharing that. Workaholism, I think, is no different than alcoholism or substance abuse. It's also a different way to escape. And I could attest to that. I hyper focus on my career for 20 years. And the stress thing, you're right. Most people think that stress is bad, but there's eustress, which is good stress. And then there's distress, which is the not good stuff. So we definitely need the balance, like you said. How would you state, or how would you recommend a male to look for help?
Yeah, males have a problem, many problems, but one of them is that they're more hesitant to go to a therapist or seek help than others. And there's this whole, again, we're back to the expectation that, this foolishness that men are supposed to be certain ways. And it's been shown, we're all the same people. And one thing I have heard, which I found really helpful in talking to people, is that men are more likely to open up if they're moving. They're like moving targets. So I know there's a therapist here in Halifax who calls it free range therapy, Nick Cardone, and wonderful guy, but he does therapy for males only, and it's while being active. So whether it's walking, hiking, I think he plays basketball with them too, but it's a way to get men to open up. And that is a challenge. There's definitely a higher hesitancy for men to open up than for women. But I think women face a challenge from the other side, is that, if women open up, that old, stereotype of, well, women are more emotional, they're not able to handle it. So on both sides, we're facing stigma. And but I think the biggest thing is to find a way that feels comfortable. But I do hear that one of the big ways for men is to get them moving. And I have a lot of hike and talks, so I find that that's really helpful. But I think too, men can respond to coaching, and maybe kind of wording therapy as coaching is another way to get an opening there. But I think too, we're getting to a point where it's not quite as bad. And if we say, like, the impact that an entrepreneur has on the people around them, it's not just your own mental health. It is the mental health of all the people who either work with you, work for you, work around you, your family. You have a huge impact on a lot of people. So it's important that you take care of yourself, so that you can be really good to the people around you for them.
That's a great point, Michael, that it's not just you if you are suffering, it's not just you suffering typically.
Yeah, I was horrified when I was closing the business down on the consulting side. We had this incredible woman who worked to try to organize us as best she could, Allison, and was just a lovely woman. And they talked about D&C days. I said, "What's a D&C day?" And she said, "Part of my job was to see what mood you were in when you came in the morning." And she said, "I could tell when you walked through the door what it was going to be like." And I would email everybody and say D&C day, which is duck and cover, so that I was clearly in a tense, uptight mood, and that was going to be felt by all. So I think that's something we all have to realize, is that we definitely affect the people around us. And, it's not contagious, but it definitely affects the mood of people around you. And if you're creating a toxic environment by not dealing with the challenges you're facing, you're making it really tough for other people. So I've seen people who, where one partner is desperate to try to understand what's going on with the other. This is your closest relationship in life, and yet you can't talk to them, or you feel you can't talk to them. So it's just really understanding that, connecting to the people around you and being open and honest. I'm very open with my team. Like, I don't use them as therapists, but I'm really open with what's going on. I never want them to think they've done something wrong because I'm not in that mood today. And what I found it's done is that they're incredibly open now about I only work with millennials too, but they're incredibly open with how they're feeling and what's going on with them. And we had this one chat about ADHD one day, which would never have happened in any of the other businesses I've had before. So again, like I'm really lucky that I'm working in this environment that's just open, supportive, and we can talk about anything.
Yeah.
And I love that someone, like, you don't have to tell me you need a mental health day. And you don't have to call it that. Just say, I need some time, need some space. I'm going to walk the dog, for the morning, take a hike, do whatever you're going to do. I'm going to build a motorcycle. Don't care. Like, just take it. I know we're going to get the outcomes we're looking for. So, take care of yourself along the way.
Thank you. Melanie, did you have a question?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've got many and they haven't fully articulated because thank you, Michael. That's an amazing story. I think it is also incredibly brave and it's a great example you're setting for people.
Thank you.
So appreciate you sharing. Do you feel as though you mentioned you work with millennials, and something I keep thinking about is, do you see a shift? Do you, because, we're of a certain generation, you came from a certain background. Are you seeing a shift from millennials and then into Gen Z, perhaps in that people are more comfortable speaking openly, and are you hopeful for that to continue? Not that there isn't still stigma, but just wondering if you see a shift.
I am hopeful. I believe there is a difference. We're all people, but there's definitely generational differences between us. And I find millennials are much more open to talk about things.
Mm.
And there's not that judgmental aspect that I think a lot of boomers have. And I always feel boomers are focused on performance. How do I perform so that I meet the expectations that are upon me? Whereas millennials are, how do I work in a way that makes me feel good about myself and the work that I'm doing? And I would like to be a millennial. Not to be that age again. I'm okay with my age. Well, not really, but anyway. I like the openness. But there's still a lot of issues with millennials in terms of how much they share, how they share it, how they manage it. So we all have our challenges, but I do feel that millennials are more open. They're now moving into the management ranks, which is definitely pushing the limits of companies. And no one's asked, but I'm going to say this one, like that the one thing that companies can do to make a difference is for leaders first to open up. Everyone says, well, we've got these wellness programs, like everything, we've done all these things. Great. But until you talk and until you admit that and be vulnerable, other people are not going to feel that they can be. If the CEO, if the president, if the business owner keeps it all in and doesn't share that they too have anxiety or have challenges, then you don't have to do the gritty details, but just say, you know what? Yeah, I feel anxiety a lot too. I'm anxious about this, anxious about that. When the senior leader admits that they too are human, then the rest of us can go, oh, okay, then it's all right for me to take advantage of the company programs and to involve ourselves. But when that senior leader keeps that stiff upper lip and everything's good and everything's positive and there is a balance, but until you're going to be open yourself and be actively engaged in whatever the strategy is that you're bringing to the company, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I can see that, and I'm glad you feel hopeful. I do as well. Do you also feel as though, I feel sometimes that it's older generations do this to the up and coming generations all the time. Oh, kids these days, blah blah blah. They've done it since Socrates. There's always this, when there's a shift in a positive direction, like in this case, mental health, weirdly, it gets turned against the younger generation. Oh, they're so entitled. The idea that being happy in your workplace and not being driven to mental illness because of your, the work you have to do to live in your career, that's entitled. So I'm hoping as well that will shift. I don't hear that quite as much now. I'm actually hearing a little bit more positivity around, but when millennials first started entering the workplace, oh my gosh, the backlash, and even the fact that they want to work for companies that are doing good and that they feel proud to be a part of.
And they will leave.
They will leave.
If you do not.
Right. And that was such an affront to the, head down, get your work done. Yes, sir. No, sir. 3 bags full thing that essentially was the working world for a very, very, very long time. So, okay. No, that's great. I'm glad, given the research you've done and your experiences, I'm glad you also see it as a positive shift.
There's 2 things that are happening as well. Like the pandemic, everyone's talking about what the pandemic has done. All the trends that are coming to bear from the pandemic were there before. What the pandemic has done is escalated them, amplified them, sped them up, all those things. Mm-hmm. The incident rate of mental illness used to be around 20%, and it was increasing. Over the last year, it's gone up to 41%. So we're nearing what we had thought would happen within 10 years, that we're getting about half of people facing mental illness each year. The other thing it's much more prevalent around us. The second thing that's happened is that organizations, companies are now facing the fact that this isn't an individual problem. This is an organizational problem. So most of people's challenges to mental health are rooted in childhood, but they're usually triggered by work. So organizations can do one of the greatest things possible to help people, which is to raise awareness of what mental illness is, what it isn't, and to reduce that stigma. And that's something that I think companies are fully responsible for doing, and need to step up, and not to donate a check to some gala dinner every year, which is just a PR photo op. And I know it's great and all that, but do something else. Actually get engaged in the people who work for you, with you, and be open, and make sure it's an environment that's supportive.
Where would you suggest entrepreneurs and business owners go? Like, what resources are available, or where's a good spot for some resources if we want to build an organization and provide that education around mental health and illness?
There's actually not a lot of resources available. That is one of the challenges. I think governments, federal government particularly, did an incredible job financially helping companies get through the pandemic. It would have been wonderful if they had provided like a $2,500 grant for getting mental health support. That would have at least covered 10 to 12 sessions, so that would have been great. They didn't. But the biggest challenge we face is on the supply side. We don't have enough therapists and counselors. We need to make a push for universities to graduate more psychologists, counselors, therapists. It's an area that's not going to stop demanding people. Yeah. And we're simply not graduating enough people. I don't quite understand that one, that there's a clear issue. It's been coming for years, and yet the academic sector has not opened up to graduate more people. And we're talking, like, in one sense, the province has said we're going to hire every nurse that graduates in the next 5 years, which, that's great, but throwing numbers doesn't mean it's going to be a better working environment. I'll put it out there. On the other hand, we haven't said we're going to make sure that every psychologist who graduates will have a place here. We should be doing that. Remote and virtual therapy have become an access point for many that works, but there's nothing like being in person. You really connect with somebody, and it's important. But we need to increase the resources on the supply side. So we've been innovating all around, virtual health and virtual therapy, and using different tools to help. What we haven't done is increase the actual supply. So if people suddenly go, hey, you're right, I really need to go to somebody, try to find somebody. And therapists themselves are overwhelmed. They can only work so many hours, to protect themselves for others. Yeah. So that's the big thing for me, is if we don't increase supply, we're going to be incredibly challenged.
Well, Michael, thank you for so much for your time today. The real bottom line here is that mental health matters, and just go for a walk and a talk. Thanks so much, Michael.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to The Real Bottom Line. This show is produced by Black Star Wealth. Executive producer, Wendy Brookhouse. To learn more about the show or to contact us, go to blackstarwealth.com.